Accelerationism. You may or may not have heard of this term, but you can probably already guess based on context what it means. Proponents of this philosophy make this argument. Society is already collapsing between the god-awful economy, the insane political polarization, and the downfall of social community. The world is going to hell in a handbasket. For a long time, we coped our way into believing somehow we'd find a solution. Maybe with enough bailouts and stimulus packages, we'd get the economy going. Maybe Trump will be able to save us. Maybe we just need to return to traditional values. But at this point, it's become bleedingly obvious that these proposed solutions are wishful thinking at best. We're simply too far gone at this point, and a collapse is inevitable. So, if we're headed for a collapse and there's no way around it, wouldn't it be best to just accelerate to Armageddon as soon as possible and get it all over with? This way, we could completely tear down the failing old system and rebuild society from scratch. I wouldn't say I'm completely in favor of this personally, but there are some good arguments on both sides. So let's break this down. Now, if you simply Google accelerationism, a bunch of weird, wacky stuff comes up. You'll see that it's a far-right white supremacist theory and all kinds of crazy shit. Per usual, terms get hijacked by extremists. And so, to keep things simple, we're simply going to define accelerationism as the idea that this failing society should collapse as soon as possible and set up for a rebuild. As a millennial who got hardcore screwed over by the 2008 financial crash, I definitely see the potential long-term benefits in a total system collapse. Financial crashes happen, and in most cases, the economy eventually recovers. This never happened with the 2008 financial crash. We are still very much suffering the consequences of it, no matter what the dishonest government numbers say. Part of the reason we never recovered from the 2008 crash was because an exorbitant amount of money, $700 billion to be exact, was spent on bailouts to try and soften the impact. This was followed up by a massive $831 billion stimulus package the very next year in an attempt to artificially restart the economy. Needless to say, none of this had any lasting impact, and as a result, the economy never really recovered. It was a really strange experience for me as a young adult, paying my own bills for the first time. The 2008 crash is often compared to the Great Depression, and one signature of the Great Depression is that although it was impossible to get a job for most people, prices of everything completely plummeted. In 2008, not only was it impossible to get a job, but prices somehow kept rising, and we were stuck paying high prices on everything with no job prospects. When you combine this with the fact that our delusional boomer parents were insistent on kicking us out at 18 in the midst of a terrible economic crash that they caused, life as a young millennial adult was really unbearable. And because they didn't fully let the system collapse and recover, these economic problems have extended an entire generation down to Gen Z a full 16 years later. I sometimes wonder what would have happened if they would have just let it all collapse and properly rebound. This also proves that this isn't a Democrat versus Republican thing. George Bush was the Republican president who signed the bailouts. Obama was the Democrat president who signed the stimulus. Both sides just suck, and neither of them can salvage this situation, even if they wanted to, which they likely don't. It's important to note that we're living in a very different time now than 2008. It's not just the economic situation that people are frustrated by right now, but the social and political climate as well. People are so angry and divided right now, and a full-on societal collapse would be far more catastrophic and thorough now than it would have been in 2008. We're not just talking about the economy collapsing, we're talking about full-scale anarchy and crime on the streets. In fact, in some places it's already happening. The resulting collapse would result in far more violence and bloodshed, which is one argument against it we'll talk about in a bit. But the end result would be an opportunity to rebuild the system completely from scratch. Okay, so now that I've made the case for accelerationism, I'm going to, per usual, be as objective as possible and present the arguments against it as well. The main argument against it is obvious. As we mentioned earlier, it will cause unprecedented apocalyptic levels of death and destruction in the short term. Every system you currently take for granted to keep you alive, from the police to hospitals to the military, will be up in flames. It will be literally every man for himself. If you're watching this video, chances are you're very frustrated with society, and rightfully so. And a lot of you have said in the comments that you don't care if society collapses. I absolutely empathize and understand the sentiment. Hell, my whole channel is basically an anti-society channel itself. But it's easy to say that when you haven't actually experienced a full-on collapse yet. If this doomsday scenario were to actually happen, would you really be ready for it? Would you be ready to physically fight and protect yourself? Would you be ready to venture out into the wilderness and hunt your own food? Maybe some of you would be prepared for it, I don't know. But it's worth asking yourself these questions to be sure if this is what you want. Also, assuming you do survive the collapse, what comes after that? Someone will have to take charge and rebuild society. Would you be willing to step up? If you're too checked out and have no desire to rebuild society, I certainly don't blame you. But if everyone has this mindset, which certainly isn't wrong on an individual level, progress just won't be possible on a macro level. This is a tricky paradox, as what's good for the individual isn't necessarily good for society, and vice versa. I don't know the answers to all of these questions myself, but it's definitely something worth having a long conversation over. The ultimate problem with all of this, however, is that any argument against accelerationism isn't an argument against societal collapse. It's just an argument for a future societal collapse at a different date. It's just kicking the can down the road, delaying the inevitable for as long as possible, so that hopefully we won't be around to feel the brunt of it. But if we do this, we'll ultimately just be passing this problem on to the next generation. Wouldn't that make us no better than the boomers we love to shit on? The only moral argument against accelerationism is if you can think of some extremely radical solution to somehow avert this crisis. Otherwise, you're just passing these problems on to future generations who, like you, never asked to be born and to deal with all this. Do you see any potential solutions on the horizon? Do you have any potential solutions in mind that you'd like to propose? Tell us in the comments, as I'm excited to see what solutions you might have. The only thing I see that could potentially save us is the AI revolution. We'll have no choice but to cross our fingers and hope the robots have our best interests in mind. This could actually happen in the year 2040, and it could be the one last hope for Gen Z. Check out this video right here to learn more.